Hello and welcome to Stephen University. This week we discuss On the Run, as we're now experimenting with Chris. What was it about?
Sure. It was about Stephen's having a read of some books on the run, and then the gems come back, saying that they're helping, protect things, clean things up from what's been happening, secure things. And then Steve, because something bad happened, and they reveal a bit more about the situation, that the gems wanted to do something bad on Earth that they didn't want to do, so they sort of fought back. Stephen takes this opportunity to ask no follow-up questions, as is his want. And he instead talks about how that reminds him of his own book series that he's into. Selfish prick. No, I'm joking. That leads to Amethyst and him going off to be no home boys, where they don't have a home. So they go off adventuring. Stephen begins to get a little bit tired of that, and Amethyst reveals where she's actually from, which is sort of like a hive for gems. And it becomes apparent that what the gems wanted to do, what some bad gems wanted to do, was create more bad gems and presumably turn the whole world into this sort of gem farm type situation, or the whole Earth rather. Amethyst is struggling to deal with that, so her and Pearl have some fights, and she sort of reveals that she doesn't like where she came from, doesn't like the fact that she never asked for it, never asked to be made. Pearl's like, but you're the one good thing to come from this place. They have a hug, which is, there's lots of nice moments in that. They also have a pretty bitchin' fight, and then they all go home. Or depending on the view of home, what should be considered their home. I thought some pretty powerful shit. I'm wondering, how stuff is still being revealed, 100 episodes after this, because they are revealing a lot in season 1.
Mate, but I'm still to this day going how is there still shit I don't know, and how is that fine?
Because they're answering a lot, and because I was like, oh, Stephen, ask some follow-up questions, and then I'm like, oh, later on I'm like, oh no, this is getting revealed anyway, cool. Amazing
this
mix.
This is one of those episodes that at the beginning you just think it's going to be tantalizing hints with no real payoff, and then of course the revelations, and I'm going to phrase this because there's still a fair bit of detail missing, but the revelations that there were gems on Earth intending to harm it, and I think you can quite clearly infer here, I don't think this is a spoiler to say, you can quite clearly infer here that the kindergarten, the creation of more gems is clearly probably not good for the Earth. They make that kind of clear. And the idea that the crystal gems, as it were, rose and garnet. And did you pick it up? Actually, quick question: did you pick up in the beginning that when they're talking
something was
about
wrong
it,
with Amethyst?
that they don't reference Amethyst? Pearl says, "Me, your mother, and Garnet," or something like that. Felt that what they were doing was wrong.
Yeah,
she doesn't
picked up on that,
reference Amethyst
and her anger towards it as well. And I'd love to go back and see whether, when they reference Homeworld and those sorts of things in earlier episodes, she looks a bit different. Whether this is again one of those things that has been thread all the way through. I just thought there was so much to like about this. It was this amazing balance between character, mythology, and action. We got all three of them. In again, it's amazing what this show does in 11 minutes, and we got it. It was great, a really great fight scene, which I actually had to rewind and watch a little bit of because I couldn't work out. It happened so quick that I was like, has Stephen chose not to bubble both of them? Has he chosen to protect just Pearl? And then I saw again clearer the second time that Garnet, Amethyst literally steps out of the bubble, which was an interesting moment. And you see tears and stuff, and it's just fascinating.
Do you like the idea? So do you like this idea of the rebel gems, them looking at what's going on? And I think it's interesting because we've sort of in the episode where we see Rose's video to Stephen, she talks about humanity and humans and protect them and all that stuff, and she talks, she
loves them.
And when you think about that, in this context, when you put those two things together, it all has a real sense of forethought to like they've really put this together well, I think, because you sort of it all sort of tracks quite nicely because of course if someone thought like Rose thought about humanity and Earth and the people on it and what they're worth, the idea of doing something that could damage that planet in any way would be potentially a very bad thing.
Yeah, definitely.
And you can sort of understand her rebellion.
But it's also such not only that element, but again, it fully it stuns me the level of creativity and cleverness behind these storylines. So they have set the raising of the stakes that having that be Amethyst's backstory does is incredible. Like it is, high book level quality of Harry Potter levels of layers in that you've got it's not just as so many children's shows before it would have been. Like take Power Rangers, which obviously I adore. But take those early seasons of Power Rangers. Essentially, Rita Repulsa versus the Power Rangers. Rita versus Zordon and his army. That's it. That's it. Now this show has set up a scenario where we've got bad gems versus good gems, but we have a good gem that has been created by the bad gems, and the conflict and the weight that adds to that conflict is just stunning, and so interesting, and such a level above traditional children's TV.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, to be fair, you don't watch a huge amount of traditional children's TV, so I don't know how accurate. No, I'd agree. I would say I think,
and I get the feeling like shit like Dragon Ball. From what you've said, like Dragon Ball Z probably did similar stuff, and I know Avatar's got some layers, but
well, it's interesting
compared to SpongeBob.
Yeah, I was just about to say. Yeah, when you look at it, depends what you're looking at, because if you're looking at like Dexter's Lab and SpongeBob and like what else were they airing when I was younger, like Ed, Ed and Eddie, things like that just I actually didn't really get into. You're right, those shows.
Whoa. I mean, Ed, Ed and Eddie. You've got like three very different brothers, and like one of them's got an extra D and a Y.
Yeah, and they drew a face on a plank of wood, I think, and it was a character.
I just think you're underestimating it. If you were picking on like
coming after Steven University, educating Ed, Ed and Eddie.
If you were talking, that's a good one. If you were talking, like what was that one? Oh, was it Ren and... No, it was like... Oh, it was something and something. But it wasn't Ren and Stimpy. It was the other one. I don't know.
Cow and Chicken?
It'll come to me. Possibly, yeah. If you're talking Cow and Chicken, that's some horse shit right there. But Ed, Ed and Eddie.
I think you're right and also not right with what you're saying, though, because I think that... and I'll explain that, because I agree with you on the whole, because I do think this is arguably the most complex sort of kids show out there, and I 100% agree that this is a huge step forward for like just giving kids the respect of saying, hey, we believe you're capable of handling complex storytelling, stories that go over multiple episodes, that have interesting character arcs with a bit more depth. We trust you're smart enough to follow along with that, and also we'll give you all the usual sort of laughs and some interesting imagery and maybe some fight scenes, all that stuff you expect, but we're going to give it a bit more depth, we're going to give it a bit more context and a bit more character stuff. And you're right to say that like this is a bit, in that sense, it's very good at doing that. But I will say that in recent years, kids' television is just in general elevating. You look at shows like Over the Garden Wall, which was a stunning sort of character study and a look at the psychology of this kid, and then you look at something like Avatar: The Last Airbender, which did something very similar to this show, in which it had a very, very complex and well thought out backstory that they sort of got deeper into the history of the show and the world as they got further into it. So I don't think Steven Universe is unique these days, but it is amazing at it. And I will say that from your perspective, I can see how you would come to that conclusion, though, because of course you don't watch kids TV now, and when you did watch that sort of stuff, the level was much lower, much lower. And there is still a lot of that stuff on TV. There are still a lot of, like, you look at a show like Uncle Grandpa, which is just madness. It's just silly madness.
Why have you watched so much kids animation? Because in the hope of finding a Steven Universe.
Yeah, I think so. I think in recent years there's been so much good stuff. Like Avatar: The Last Airbender, I think was my gateway drug to like watching animated shows as a adult. Like animated shows aimed at kids, because obviously I was always watching things like Archer and Bob's Burgers and, you know, and South Park and BoJack Horseman, those sort of shows, and Rick and Morty. Those shows I would have stumbled across no matter what, because they're aimed at adults. But watching actual shows aimed at, and certainly the demographic they're designed for is sort of a younger audience. Coming across those that the gateway drug for that was certainly Avatar: The Last Airbender, because I just went, okay, these shows are capable of being as good as any drama I'm ever going to watch, you know, any adult show I'm ever going to watch. They're capable of doing that. So my ears were then sort of what's the word I'm looking for? They sort of pricked up on the internet, looking out for more shows with that complexity. And I am selective. I don't just watch everything, but I'll go based on sort of what sort of feedback I'm seeing on forums and things like that. And if people are talking about the sort of things that I'm looking for in these shows, that level of complexity, then I'll give them a chance. And then you stumble across something like Adventure Time, which then breaks a whole new barrier, because it's not just got that complexity, but it's also just doesn't give a shite about like whether you get anything out of an individual episode or not. Like it doesn't matter if like they do something. Not every episode needs to be mythology or important. They can just be completely silly and almost time wasting. But then they just suddenly will drop mythology and deep drama on you. That, you know, that's really good stuff. I don't know if I've talked about it on this podcast before, but Finn losing his arm in Adventure Time was one of the most gut-wrenching moments. You know, his dad literally took a part of him as he let, and that's really powerful. And so they as I go on and find more of these sorts of shows, things like Gravity Falls, that just achieve so much. It's I'm totally sucked in. So I am now very conscious of what's on kids' TV, and I will check out shows and then discover that they don't have those layers the same way that Steven Universe or Adventure Time does, and I will give up. Like, you know, that's fine. But it does mean that I do have like a really heightened awareness of where kids' TV is right now, and I know a lot of those shows.
And I think in a way it's a shame that more people, and I'm aware I was one of them until this podcast, didn't know about that. Like I say, because also this episode has a song. It literally has, you know, just everything you could want from an episode of this show. I think it's just great animation, the fight again, and just the rawness and the way you really feel Amethyst's pain and emotion is just fantastic.
It's the clarity of how conflicted she feels, because I think what's interesting is you when I was watching it then, what I experienced was two simultaneous thoughts of like, I'm not sure it's completely clear how she's feeling right now, and then the other part of my brain going, oh no, that's on purpose, because she's not sure how she feels. She doesn't know how to feel about any of this. So that duality I'm sensing is like,
because they go there under a guise of this isn't my home, that isn't my home, but this place is my home. And then the second they get there, she resents it, hates it, and it makes her question herself. And they do a really good job of making the place feel eerie. And also, like, again, just that whole plot of the gems, and then wanting to take over the earth for like this gem farm and to breed other gems. That's a science fiction movie plot.
Yeah, you can make a movie out of that, 100%. Absolutely. Yeah. And you're right, when she gets there, there's the fondness. She's like, oh, this is that rock I climbed over, and this is that rock I kicked into that other rock. And it's like, you know, you feel her like, and I feel like what it ultimately comes down to, and the reason it's so genius, is she doesn't feel like she has much of a home, full stop. You know, she's not from Homeworld, and now she's with the crystal gems. She doesn't feel really like she's part of that sort of those Homeworld gems born on Earth either. And it's like, where does that leave her? And and it's one of those things we've talked about this off mic before. We talked about like some of the most interesting characters being ones with what we call like we I think we used to refer to it as good contradictions and bad contradictions. So there's a contradiction of character that just physically doesn't make sense. Like a person can't believe that beer is the greatest drink ever made and also simultaneously the worst. That's a bad contradiction. It doesn't make sense. But you could like have a character that has a contradiction that like fits it. So in that example, maybe they prefer cider or something, or they also have a part. They are also partial to cider. So it's like there's contradictions that make characters more complex and more realistic and more human because people are more complex than just a set of binary thoughts.
Dexter is the example of that. This is a character that investigates and tries to,
just to clarify the context of this conversation, you're referring to Dexter, the Showtime show, not Dexter from Dexter's Lab.
Yeah. But he is at the same time a serial killer. Like it's whole shows have been built around these contradictions, and actually, I think they do a good job. Especially in this episode, in one moment that just made me go, that's a bit harsh. They do a good job of showing that Amethyst does have this darker side. Her fight with Pearl, her attitude sometimes. In this episode, the rage and the fight with Pearl. But more than that was her that I just went, Jesus, that's a dick move. Is obviously before any of this reveal with her homeworld. The fact that Steven's lunch gets taken away by a raccoon. And then she just eats hers, but she doesn't need food. Like, that has been a pre-established thing that the gems don't need to eat, whereas Steven does. So for her to just wolf down her food, it was literally like, I'm like, in my head, I'm like, that's a dick move. Like, literally that dick move. So, like, even within the episode, prior to what we see, they play with that, harsher streak that she has.
You're right that, in a weird way, as much as I don't often think of this one as one of my favourites, it is almost a perfect episode because it has this huge... It does really have... It's amazing. It has a song, it has great comedy, like the raccoon thing really cracked me up. When he came back and ate the food and Stephen was like, the raccoon's back. Like, that was just amazing. It had the huge mythology reveals. It had an awesome, really awesome fight scene. It had all this implications about the future. It had all this dramatic weight. It had all this character insight. I mean, it literally, I am surprised that this didn't really register to me as what, because honestly, when we sat down to watch this, I was just like, oh yeah, this is on their own. I vaguely remember this. They visit the kindergarten and like, I think they run away. They have the bindle, and that great joke. I remember the joke about why didn't you bring your backpack because it wouldn't fit in my bindle, which I thought was great. So I had vague memories of the episode, but I did not remember it being this good at all. And it is really staggeringly good. It is top notch stuff. It's as good as anything we've seen thus far, I feel.
Yeah, I think it's because it hits all the points. Because it hits all the points really well, as opposed to hitting one point great. You're less, after watching it, you're less like, oh my god, like woo, like you like Mirror Gem, Ocean Gem, and like the test as well. I really liked, but that's because the test dealt with Steven and the gems' relationship and really went for it, whereas this deals with Pearl and Amethyst's relationship and Pearl's Amethyst's backstory and how that affects the whole backstory of the gems and feelings of home, and it does so much so well that I think it's you have to kind of sit back and go, oh no shit, that was quite an episode.
And in a previous episode, you talked about sometimes preferring the episodes of the show where they focused on a thing rather than trying to do everything well. We talked about that on an earlier, a pretty early episode, somewhere around sort of episode 18, 19. I can't remember exactly where. I
think that's partly because it's so hard to do all the things well, and the episodes that do all the things well are elevated because of that.
But you're sort of going,
this being one of them.
But and you're saying that sometimes they do that, and the episode sort of suffers a little bit because it sort of does everything okay, but nothing amazing. Am I right in?
I think so. Yeah, potentially. I mean, it's hard to think. To pull out specific exambles.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which episode you talked about that in, because maybe we could compare and contrast. Because there was an episode in the somewhere between episode 15 and 20 of this podcast. You because I had to re-listen to it recently because someone put a comment on one of the YouTube videos and I didn't understand what the fuck they were talking about because I didn't remember what we said, so I had to listen to it back, being like, what the hell are they referencing? And it was a pretty obscure reference in the end. I can't even remember what that was now, but when I listened back to the episode, I found that very interesting what you were talking about, because you were sort of saying, like, you know, trying to be jack of all trades doesn't always pay off, and like in that example, it hadn't worked for you because of that, because it tried to be everything. But whereas here, you're praising it for the very thing that other episode was sort of unsuccessful at achieving.
Maybe that boils down to, in the end, good writing.
Yeah. So maybe it's not a hard and fast rule.
No, I think that would be fair to say. Yeah, I think it probably comes down to the script, as you know, as so many things do.
Did you notice in this is just me pointing out a little bit of a continuity for you, in the episode where Peridot showed up, the green gem, the actual green gem, not Lapis, the gem you keep calling the green Power Ranger gem. Yeah. Did you notice that she actually referred when she came through the galaxy warp, or whatever they call it, the one that leads to Homeworld? She talked about reactivating the kindergarten.
Oh no, I wouldn't have noticed that, but yeah, that's cool.
Which is now we know what that is. It's a cool thing to sort of put together. Obviously, any theories going forward? Anything that stuck out about this other than just obviously there's obviously revelations here, but anything?
It felt like a very ominous shot at the end. Like I was almost expecting other things to start crawling out, but instead that focus in on there's other, you know, machines, there's those other spiky things. It just felt like it felt like that was it just felt ominous.
No, I'd agree with that. There's like a sudden shift in the music as well.
It's a shit theory. Something's gonna happen involving that, but you know, it's like, any theories, Chris? Yeah, Steven's gonna learn some shit. You know, but it definitely felt like that ain't done.
Also, want to read you an interesting quote in relation to this from Ocean Gem. Lapis says to Steven, "Don't you know anything, Steven? Your friends, they don't really care about other gems. All they care about is Earth. But I never believed in this place." That gives an interesting new context to that quote. Now now, because you sort of think like, it's weird that, because then you sort of thinking, that maybe they're not so bad, these gems. Because from what Lapis is saying there, the perspective is that maybe the gems needed Earth to continue to, you know what I mean? Like, so you can sort of take it from that the Earth was essential to the gems, sort of as a race carrying on, maybe, and that they don't care about other gems. They were too busy protecting Earth. Like, they were willing to, you know, there's an implication to what she's saying there that's quite interesting.
And that always makes for fascinating stories, and it, you know, maybe after I say this, it will happen, and I could be like, I said that on a podcast years ago. But I remember, you know, it was talked about with the an interesting point on The Walking Dead, which neither of us watch anymore as of this season, but the kind of point was made that the idea of one of the ideas that makes Negan interesting when he was first introduced is, you could argue that if you followed Negan's story all the way through, then our guys would be the bad guys. And I think it's in a world where everyone's trying to make a franchise, and in a world where audiences have gotten used to, even in movies, you know, you hear one thing and you having to invest in multiple movies. It's a surprise that no one's gone, here's one side of the story, here's the other side, and here's part 3 where they battle it out, and actually you support both. And as I'm saying that, I realised that Civil War was kind of that, and from what you've said, The Affair also kind of covers that. But I think it's interesting. Yeah,
The Affair's a great show. If anyone isn't watching The Affair, you should be. It's a great TV show. It sort of shows a dramatic situation from two people's perspectives, and they have very different interpretations of how events played out, or memories of how things played out. And it's a fascinating sort of character study, and a great drama on the whole. And it is an acting clinic, I will say.
But it does feel like you're right that they're putting, you know, there's going to be more than one side to this.
Yeah, and you know what? That's just something I'm putting together now from putting that quote in the context of this episode, which I didn't even do when we rewatched it. So it's interesting. It's a good experience, this, because I'm sort of seeing patterns I didn't see the first time round.
What a layered onion this show is.
I know. Let's hope that onion doesn't become a weird person that barely talks, that steals all my toys.
There's a weird... Onion's weird.
Onion.
Weird character.
What did we learn this week, guys? Onion's weird. He wasn't in the episode, but we learned he's weird. He's weird. He's just weird. Okay, cool. So, also loved the cool kids coming back briefly. Sorry, I wanted to mention that in the pizza.
Yeah,
car.
that was funny. It was funny that they were way more accepting of him. Like, oh, yeah, get in.
Yeah. And I also just loved that Beach City's welcome sign has a really bad pun on it.
Yeah.
With the word sea replaced with the words sea with the ocean.
That was good.
Yeah. See you soon, I think is what it said.
Right, we'll see you soon. Just looking for the awkwardness.
I know, because we sort of hinted we'd bring that back last week, didn't we?
We got to give the people what they want, Dan.
Yeah, but the thing is, we stopped doing it because it got boring, and if it got boring for us, then it got not funny. I'm guessing because that's the only reason we would stop doing it. So I don't know.
We could bring it back, and then in a few weeks see comments like, "Oh God, I wish they'd stop doing these."
I bet that happened long before. Anyway, that is everything for this week. I've been Dan Doolan.
I've been Chris Billingham,
and we'll see you next week as we discuss an episode that's name I haven't looked up. Okay, that's awkward. Should I find out what it is actually called?
Yeah.
I wish I knew. Why did I not have it in front of me? Okay, are you ready? We'll try it again. We'll pretend it didn't happen.
Yep. Okay, that'll be the awkwardness.
Yeah. That's everything for this week. I've been Dan Doolan.
I've been Chris Billingham, saying this for the first time with enthusiasm.
And we'll speak to you next week, because obviously this isn't at all the second time we're doing this, as we discuss an episode titled that I didn't just look up, Horror Club.
Horror Club. How do you remember these titles, Dan?
Oh, I'm so good.
You are the best.
My memory is amazing.
Like an elephant. No, elephants have shit memories, don't they? What is it? No, elephants have good memories. Fish have bad memories.
Yeah.
Yeah, memory like an elephant, yeah.
No, an elephant never forgets.
They never forget, yeah.
Yeah. Dan Doolan.
You know, as a kid, I
was really hoping you'd be like, Chris Billingham. And I was just going to say, Horror Club.
Oh, no, I didn't hear the notes. Oh, damn. That's awkward now, because the joke didn't land. No, as a kid, I used to, speaking of sayings, I used to chuck pennies on the floor, because I'd be giving people good luck.
Or littering.
Either or.
All right, so cool. let's another ending that we haven't already done, but we're going to pretend like we haven't done it already. But Dan Doolan,
Chris Billingham,
Horror Club.